Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening to the What's on Sports podcast. That smiling guy to my left. So that's actually that smiling guy to my left is the sports nerd. They call him the sports nerd. It's Lance Fernandez. Lance, how are you today, buddy?
I'm doing well, but before we start, John, I must make an apology. I must make an apology to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because last time we were together, I said it was an overtime. So they still won. My prediction is still right, but I underestimated them. So I have to apologize, Tom Brady and crew. I have underestimated you. Well, what a beatdown you just gave the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 54.
Well, we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the game in depth, and we're going to tell you where we were right, and we were right about a lot of stuff, and we'll tell you about the things that we were wrong about because we did get a couple things wrong. But I think we called exactly how this game was going to go. Mainstream sports media missed it completely as far as what the story was and the narrative. And I think you and I really broke down what was going to happen. It happened almost exactly like we said it was going to happen. Now, it didn't go into overtime like you said, but I think the scenarios that you and I worked out and talked about worked out almost exactly like we talked about. Again, we'll get into that later. Before we go any further, I've already told you who he is. Let me tell you who I am. My name is John Todora, and they call me the sports trader because I trade sports just like other people trade stocks. And as part of me doing this show, I get to tell you about our website, which is two websites, actually. We have the What's on Sports website, which, of course, is the sponsor of this entire show. And our co-sponsor is my website, which is called sportstradingsystems.com. If you want to learn how to trade sports, just like other people trade stocks, you can go over there today and check out tons of information. There's free stuff. There's paid stuff. Go over to sportstradingsystems.com today and learn a lot more. I'll let you know for basketball season, we're up over 90% for the season, absolutely crushing it for basketball season. For football season, we hit Tampa and we hit the under, and that's it. We've been doing amazing stuff over there. Go over and check it out if you like to gamble on sports, but you're tired of losing money. Sports Trading System is the place to be. Now, like we talked about, we are going to go into some serious detail and depth about the Super Bowl. We're going to talk about some of the biggest bets we saw over the weekend, and there were some monster bets. There were some huge bets. People made huge money. We're going to talk about the odds coming out for 2022 already. I mean, this game was over for about 8 minutes, and they were already telling us which teams had the best odds to win in 2022. And then we're also going to talk about a lot of other stuff. But before we go too far, we do want to pay homage to some of the greatest players that have ever played the game, because over the weekend, which is tradition in the NFL announces who made the Hall of Fame. Now, last year's Hall of Fame inductees didn't get an opportunity to actually go and make their speeches and say their thank yous and talk about how great their careers were. So my understanding is that this year it'll be a double-sized kind of party where presentation where they're having the guys from last year talk and the guys from this year. We won't talk about last year's group, but we will focus on this year's group. Lance, who made it this year to the Hall of Fame?
Okay, so before we start, Hall of Fame, Pro Football Hall of Fame has a rule that they must induct 4 up until 8 inductees every year. So that's their minimum to maximum. And I made a prediction.
Which, by the way, really quick, I hate that rule. I understand why they do it. They do it because they want to have something every year. They want to have some type of event every year. But I much prefer the way Major League Baseball does it, which is some years people just don't get in. Like there aren't any Hall of Fame players this year. So I'm really not crazy about that rule. I just want to say that out loud. But go ahead, continue.
Yeah, but granted that there have been 25,000 players and contributors who have graced an NFL stage or a sideline. So they won't run short of candidates. But anyway, that's another topic for another matter. So I predicted months ago that the 3 senior finalists, Tom Flores, Bill Nunn, and Drew Pearson, will get in. And indeed, they got in.
They did.
Tom Flores, first Latino starting quarterback in the NFL, first player to win a Super Bowl as a player, an assistant coach, and a head coach. So those distinctions alone makes him worthy of the Hall of Fame. And of course, Drew Pearson, by the time he retired, he was the leading receiver in NFL history. And when he also won Super Bowl 12 with the Dallas Cowboys against the Denver Broncos. And he is part of the all-70s, all-decade team. and wide receiver. So long overdue as well for Drew Pearson.
Absolutely.
And what you've mentioned also before in one of our previous episodes, Bill Nunn, the architect, so to speak, the mastermind of that Steel Curtain dynasty in the 70s, because he was brave enough to go to this historical black colleges and universities to really seek players like Joe Greens and the other players who made that defense one of the elite of all time, not just during that decade, but compare it to all of the defenses that came after it, it still stacks better than those defenses. So Bill Nunn, Drew Pearson, Tom Flores in the Hall of Fame. So I also wrote an article. Sorry. Go ahead. So I also wrote an article about this prediction. So I got 4 out of 5 correct. So I have to brag that humbly because nice. I got Patrick Willis wrong, and who got in was John Lynch, and deservingly so. John Lynch has the credentials to be part of the Hall of Fame, but just personal thinking that I thought that he was still like a year or 2 away from being inducted. But again,
let me talk about some of these older guys that got in really quick, just because Tom Flores doesn't get enough credit because he took over a team that John Madden had put together, and Madden was considered this elite coach, and nobody was ever going to coach like Madden did. Madden went to 1 Super Bowl. Flores went to 2. The Raiders were not just relevant, but they were actually maybe even a little better after Madden left. Flores did a great job on the sidelines. Drew Pearson, anytime somebody's on an all 70s team, an all 80s team, all 90s team, an all 2000s team, and they don't get into the Hall of Fame, I always wonder, what are the voters thinking? The guy was one of the best of the decade. So obviously he was one of the elite guys in this position. How could you overlook that position? And in that era, there were not a lot of super great receivers like there are now. It'll be tough to pull Hall of Fame guys out now if you're really going by the credentials of like this guy was the best of his time, because I don't think there'll be those guys. There's so many great wide receivers now. It's hard to pick a best of 2010 to 2020. It's very difficult. And lastly, Bill Nunn, and I believe I told this story before, Bill Nunn isn't just one of the architects of the defense, but of the offense as well. Bill Nunn is most famously known, for those of us in Pittsburgh, for the guy that would go back in the 70s. They didn't have a game film that they shared. So a college would put together a game tape of a player and they would send it out. Maybe they'd have 1 or 2 copies and they would send it out to the teams. And then a team would look at the game film. And then as a courtesy, they would pass it along to another team. You get it for 2 days. You pass it along to the next guy, pass it along to the next guy. Bill Nunn was famous for the fact that he would sometimes get game film, and he and Chuck Noll would forget, quote unquote, to send the game film on to somebody else. So John Stallworth is a prime example of a guy that probably would have been a number 1 overall draft pick, ends up going to Pittsburgh in the 3rd or 4th, I think 3rd round, in what is quite possibly the greatest draft of all time, 1974, where they pick up not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Hall of Fame players in the exact same draft. Lynn Swann, Jack Lambert, John Stallworth, and Mike Webster picks 1, 2, 3, and 4. That will never be done again. That's just absolutely phenomenal. An incredible scout, an incredible gentleman by all accounts. So happy Bill Nunn got in. Now, there were some regular players that got in too, and more recent guys. They talked about John Lynch. I disagree with you about John Lynch needing to wait. John Lynch was the premier strong safety of his generation. He was the man, in my opinion. Well known for being a huge hitter, smart player, obviously knows the game of football. He's a general manager now. But who are some of the other guys that got in?
Okay, so first of all, there are 3 first-time ballot inductees in this class 2021. And one of them had the shortest pitch, sort of, from all the football writers, and his Peyton Manning. So the guy who started the guy who started the pitch just mentioned his name, Peyton Manning, and then he added something like, if only I had a microphone with me, I would drop it right now, just by mentioning his name. Because, well, Peyton Manning is arguably one of the best players in the National Football League. So you need no further pitching. You need no further elaborating of his accomplishments and stats, because those speak for itself. Not to mention that the title that almost eluded him for the majority of his career, the Super Bowl, he won 2 of them with 2 franchises. So that completed his Hall of Fame resume. Peyton Manning, first time Hall of Fame ballot.
Yep, no brainer for Peyton Manning. Who else?
Okay, so second of all, Megatron, Calvin Johnson.
Another no
So
brainer.
yeah, so if Peyton Manning is arguably one of the best, Calvin Johnson is like a cheat code for the Detroit Lions during those 9 seasons. Just Stafford can just throw at any angle as long as it's like a yard close to Calvin Johnson, and more likely it will be a catch, it will be a reception.
Yeah.
So imagine he played just 9 seasons and he had the record for most receiving yards in a single season, not to mention multiple Pro Bowls, and of course, just flat out dominance on the field. No defensive back, be it one, two, or three of them, covering him stand a chance. So Calvin Johnson also first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yep. And I believe Charles Woodson got in this year, right?
Yes, he's the third first ballot Hall of Famer, Charles Woodson. Again, a no-brainer. So if Manning and Calvin Johnson are no-brainers on offense, Charles Woodson is also a no-brainer in defense. Had a lengthy career, not just lengthy, but productive. And he's one of the better secondary defenders in the National Football League. And of course, just like Manning, completed his Hall of Fame resume by winning a Super Bowl with the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah.
He was injured during the second half, but did play in the first half. But that was enough to seal the deal for Charles Woodson being inducted into Canton.
You know, a lot of people think of Charles Woodson as a free safety. He finished up the final few years of his career as a fantastic free safety, but he starts off his career as a punt returner, a kick returner, and a cornerback coming out of the University of Michigan. And most people, just like Rod Woodson, people forget Rod Woodson was also a cornerback. They think I think it was a safety. Both of these guys were shut down elite corners who kind of played to the end of their ability to play cornerback and then moved over to free safety because they were still great athletes. They were still that smart. They were still great team leaders. So there's something to be said, guys that can play that long, play two different positions. And to me, and I think to a lot of people, be Hall of Fame caliber players at two different positions. Who else you got?
Okay, so last on the Hall of Fame class of 2021, it's one of your guys, Alan Faneca, of course. How can you dispel his credentials? All he did was block for multiple 1,000-yard rushers, and he had the versatility and the agility to also pull block for a lot of those Pittsburgh Steelers teams. So he's not just strong straight up. He's also agile and versatile enough to go on lead blocks for those sweep plays or those plays down the sides of the football field. So also he deserves to be inducted just because of that. So really tough guy. And of course, one of the better guys of the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise, Alan Faneca, Hall of Famer.
You know, Faneca's another one of those guys, like Drew Pearson. I believe Faneca was in the all 2010 or the 2000s team for offensive guard. So there's two players on the whole team. He's one of two of the greatest guards of a decade, and for some reason had to wait 4 years to get into the Hall of Fame. These guys, to me, are first ballot Hall of Famers. You just can't play this game where you're like, I don't know if he should get in. He's an offensive lineman. Listen, if you're an all-decade guy, if you're one of the best guys in a 10-year span, to me, that's an automatic. And I realize it's different voters voting on different things, but it was quite obvious in his time that Alan Faneca was an absolute beast. Watching that guy play was a clinic on how to play offensive line. Great technique, great power, just a sickening attitude. Wasn't afraid to get in somebody's face, wasn't afraid to defend his quarterback. Just a real stud. Congratulations to each and every one of these guys who made the Hall of Fame. I grew up watching some of these guys, and for the other ones, they were part of my adulthood. I admire every one of them, man. I went to a Hall of Fame a couple years ago. I'll tell you a quick story. I went to a Hall of Fame ceremony a couple years ago and had an absolute blast. It was just such a great moment to be there, hear all the speeches, see all the fans. People just show up and really appreciate each other. I will say, as a Steeler fan, because the Pittsburgh is so close, they're going to induct 4 people this year. There will be huge caravans of people driving out to Canton, Ohio, which is like an hour and 10-minute drive. Huge caravans of people driving out there. That will be a predominantly very, very strong Steeler crowd. Now, before we jump into our next topic, which is also kind of Steeler-based, I know you're very upset about this. You messaged me a couple times over the weekend when you saw this, and you have a strong feeling, and we'll see if you and I disagree or not. You have a strong feeling that TJ Watt, who's a Pittsburgh Steeler, was robbed of his Defensive Player of the Year award by Aaron Donald. Over the weekend, they announced all the awards. You appear to agree with all of them, Lance, but this one you happen to have an issue with. Can you please explain your issue?
Yeah, so NFL honors happened the day before Super Bowl 55, so I couldn't agree more with all of the awards, even Aaron Rodgers winning MVP. But the only award that I have contention with is TJ Watt not winning Defensive Player of the Year. And unfortunately, that has been the second time, which I think he should have won Defensive Player of the Year. So he should have been two-time Defensive Player of the Year. But they gave it last year to Stephon Gilmore precisely because, he led the league in interceptions and possibly because the Patriots made the playoffs and the Steelers didn't. But he still had this same dominant stats last year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had like 15 sacks and 41 quarterback hits in 2019. And coming into this year, he somehow replicated those stats as well, John. And his brother, of course, to his defense, former Defensive Player of the Year, J.J. Watt, posted on his Twitter a comparison of Aaron Donald's stats, who eventually won, and of course TJ Watt's stats. So just a quick run through. So tackles, TJ Watt has 12 tackle advantage, 53-41. Even in sacks, 1.5 advantage, so 13.5. Tackles for loss, 23-12 for Watt. Pressures, 55-42 for Watt. Quarterback hits, 41-26 to Watt. The only category that Aaron Donald won is forced fumbles. Donald has 4, TJ Watt has 2. Pass defenses, TJ Watt has 7, Aaron Donald has 1. And interceptions, well, TJ Watt has 1, Aaron Donald has none. So in terms of getting an overall feel or an overall impact of one person on a defense, be it pass rush, be it in coverage, be it in any other aspect of the defense, TJ Watt, bar none, hands down, 100% should have won Defensive Player of the Year this year. And it's such a shame that he is once again robbed of the award, I think, for the second straight year.
I'm a Steeler fan. I'm a huge TJ Watt fan. Obviously, how could you not be a fan of the guy, not only as a player, but as a man when you listen to him talk? He is the picture of excellence with what he does. My argument would be this: as much as I would love to see TJ Watt win the Defensive Player of the Year, I always think of the Defensive Player of the Year and the Offensive Player of the Year as completely separate types of categories. You're not going to see a Defensive Player of the Year win an MVP award, but the Defensive Player of the Year award seems to represent more of a defensive MVP award, in my opinion. That's how it's voted on by the writers, where your offensive MVP is, or your Offensive Player of the Year is more of a statistical guy, like Derrick Henry, obviously 2,000 yards. He wins Offensive Player of the Year. The argument could be made to say, how the heck could can Henry win Offensive Player of the Year, yet Rodgers win MVP? And I think it's in the phrasing. So to me, it's Rodgers was the most valuable player of the year. When you look at value on the defensive side of the ball, as valuable as I think TJ Watt is, I think that Aaron Donald has more value to his actual defense. And listen to the argument before you go any further. Aaron Donald seems to make everybody around him a little bit better. That whole defensive line plays better because Aaron Donald's taking up double teams all day long. That whole defense as a whole plays better because Aaron Donald lines up everywhere along the front four and is constantly being double teamed, constantly finding new ways to try to get to the quarterback. So he frees up a lot of other people. He also makes it so that the Rams don't have to blitz as much as maybe some other teams do. TJ Watt's also very good. But if you look at the arc of these two players throughout the course of the year, my final argument would be the Rams over the course of the last 8 games came on stronger than any defense in the NFL and truly became the number one defense over the course of that 8 games. Pittsburgh was the number one defense over the course of the 8 games and slowly but surely became a little more leaky and a little less of a great defense as the season went on. So just comparing those two things, I would gladly say that Aaron Donald is the Defensive Player of the Year. I would also say that I love TJ Watt, and I could see where your argument comes from. I may not agree with it, but I could see where your argument comes from. Statistically, he was dominant to everybody else in the NFL. He led them. And what you didn't say about all those categories is all the categories that you mentioned, he actually led the NFL in all those categories. So he led the NFL in sacks. He led the NFL in pressures. So he was definitely a terror off the edge. I just think the fact that the entire defense started to play worse and worse as the year went on, I think that's going to be held against him, unfortunately. And fair, I don't know, but TJ Watt is a great player. One last thing I will say is this too. A lot of these awards come down to name brand. So Aaron Donald is a 3-time defensive MVP, or defensive player of the year. JJ Watt is a 3-time defensive player of the year. The writers tend to get a little lazy when they look at defensive players, and they tend to go back to the same guys over and over again. So next year could be the run where TJ Watt wins his first of several defensive players of the year. For his sake, I hope so. The guy really deserves it. He plays his ass off. He's going to get paid off with a huge contract this year, and he plays for a great franchise. So if nothing else, that can be his award for now. Now, when we started this podcast, you came out right away. You came out guns blazing. You were saying that you were excited about the Super Bowl, but we held off the conversation a little bit because I didn't want to jump right into it. But the one thing I want to tell everybody is that, again, this is actually just bragging, so it may come off wrong, but we were right on this podcast. And there's a reason that I'm telling you this. To me, just like mainstream media has been almost supplanted for a lot of people by independent media because of the uncontrolled bias that we see in the regular media, whether it's Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, whatever you're watching, whatever team your politician is on, it's completely biased news. You never get the real story. Well, sports media has kind of come the same way. And sports media never gives us the real story. They give us the story that they want us to have. And the NFL could not have had a better story for the Super Bowl. You got Tom Brady, who may be the greatest quarterback of all time, against Patrick Mahomes, the one that everyone assumes will be the next great quarterback. And he's already fantastic. But the reality of it is, and I've been saying this all year long, is that Patrick Mahomes has come down to earth a little bit. Now, he still makes great plays. He really does. You still watch him every once in a while and go, wow, what the heck was that? Nobody else can do that. But he was not as good this year as he was in years prior. So building this up as the Brady versus Mahomes Super Bowl, you and I both agreed on this show that it was a mistake. Now, that was not a story that you heard on ESPN. It was not a story that you heard on Fox Sports. It was not a story that you heard in CBS Sports. They were all pumping the same story at us. But your story and my story were the same. The Kansas City Chiefs offensive line is decimated, crushed right now. And they are going to have problems with what is a very, very, very good Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensive line. And listen, I don't know if you watched any of the pregame, but I watched an interview with Pierre Paul. And Pierre Paul was literally salivating, licking his lips, thinking about going against that Kansas City offensive line. Those guys were jacked. I mean, jacked. They were ready to go, buddy. And they took over that game, and I mean, it was brutal. What can you tell us about the game that happened?
Okay, so you're right about the mainstream media, of course, favoring one side of the story because they have been desensitized that the Chiefs have been the more dominant team throughout like 2 years already. Mahomes hasn't lost for like weeks. But let's not forget the fact, and this is one of the most underrated stories during their match in the regular season, is that the Buccaneers only lost by 3 points, even though Tyreek Hill had 269 and 3 touchdowns. Yep. So that's just one field goal. So regardless of what you say about Tyreek Hill, the Buccaneers were right there with the Kansas City Chiefs throughout the game. It's just a matter that they didn't score enough. And I guess the moment that Eric Fisher went out, the moment that announcement came out, all of those pass rushers in Tampa Bay suddenly felt like Christmas again because they had the free reign on Patrick Mahomes, and it was evident throughout the game. Mahomes was just running for his dear life in like most of the possessions, especially in the second half. If not for those intentional groundings and those missed passes that he just threw at the last second, there could have been more than 3 sacks for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So officially, they have registered 3 sacks, but it felt like they should have had like 7 or 8 just because of that dominating dominating performance by the Tampa Bay front seven, essentially. And one injury for the Tampa Bay, the Kansas City O-line, rather, messed up like the entire line technically. You thought it was just one person, but because they had to do patchwork on that O-line, so they had to put right guard Remmers on left tackle. So he always gets the best rusher, so be it a Barrett or a Pierre Paul or even sometimes in Ndamukong Suh. So that spells trouble. I feel like after Super Bowl 55, once he sleeps, he still sees the faces of those three people because they've been just constantly in his face. And because he was put to right guard, so they had to put another right guard. And they had to elevate Wisniewski to the O-line. So that messed up three positions, but essentially the entire offensive line of Kansas City was decimated or was affected.
Yeah. Listen, Wisniewski wasn't even good enough to play in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh did not have a good offensive line. So Wisniewski started the season in Pittsburgh. He ends up getting hurt. They move him. They won't even put him on the regular roster. They keep him on the practice squad, and Kansas City pulls him off the practice squad because he was unprotected. That's how little Pittsburgh thought of Wisniewski this year. So this is a guy that ends up starting the Super Bowl, and along with two guys that have never played tackle before. I mean, it was just, listen, you said it before. It honestly looked like Patrick Mahomes caught the snap and was being hunted immediately. That was one of the worst offensive line plays I've ever seen in a Super Bowl, Lance. I've never seen anything worse. But go ahead.
Yeah, indeed. So some stats about that O-line. So Kansas City used my 5-man protection on 92% of dropbacks. So only 4 plays were in, they used more than 5. So if you have 5 guys who haven't played much throughout the season, and essentially their positions during the Super Bowl is their temporary position. I mean, Remmers is not really a left tackle. I mean, Eric Fisher is a Pro Bowler, so it's hard to replace him with one game, much less a Super Bowl. So that spells trouble because you have to bring in extra protection because you know what's coming. You have a Barrett, a Pierre Paul, a Suh, or sometimes Vita Vea can also break through the line of scrimmage. And there have been instances wherein he was just chasing Mahomes, even though he didn't have the speed, but the pressure was there all for the entire game, essentially. So the Kansas City offensive line has been the weakest link, the Achilles heel of this game. It hasn't been Patrick Mahomes because if he only had time, he could hit Kelsey and he could hit Tyreek Hill downfield.
So when we talked about this game, and I don't want to keep going back and beating this dead horse, but when we talked about this game, we said that there were 2 things that were going to happen here. First of all, Kansas City was going to be in trouble and with the offensive line against that pass rush. We said that. We were one of the only places that said that here at What's on Sports. We beat that subject to death. We also said that Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, as great at coaches as they are considered to be, are not great adjustment coaches. And there's a lot of people that say that they make adjustments, and I'm talking about like wholesale adjustments. You're talking about a team that literally their quarterback ran for his life on almost every drop back, and still on 92% of their pass plays, never kept the tight end to chip, never kept the fullback in the chip, instead kept putting everybody out into patterns and gave Mahomes no time. If it was any other quarterback besides Patrick Mahomes, maybe Lamar Jackson, there would have been a lot more sacks. Mahomes was magical in getting away and being able to actually get rid of the ball. Now, with that being said, I've heard a lot of people complain about some of the ticky-tack type of fouls and penalties that were called on Kansas City in the defensive secondary. And I could see somebody's point for that. But as a counterbalance to that, I will say that Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes were allowed on several occasions, at least 2 or 3 occasions, to intentionally ground the ball inside the tackle boxes and was not called. So it should have been much bigger losses. It should have been much bigger sack totals. At the very least, it should have been some intentional groundings that would have cost them a down and a lot of distance. And listen, I'm so shocked that they didn't make the adjustments. This was like watching, I went to the Super Bowl and watched Andy Reid lose his first Super Bowl, Philadelphia against New England. And New England had figured out what Andy Reid was going to do before he got there. And Reid and Donovan McNabb never made the adjustments to fix what was going on. So it cost them. It ended up costing them a Super Bowl because they just couldn't figure it out until the end. Now, that was a more competitive Super Bowl than this one was. This wasn't even a contest. This was an embarrassment of a quote-unquote Super Bowl, in my opinion. But I will say I told everybody about Kansas City. I was telling people that. Nobody was listening. Again, I called this entire game. I'm super proud of what happened. What can you tell me about Tom Brady, though? Everybody's talking about Tom Brady. Obviously, we would be remiss in having this conversation without talking about the guy who just won his not fourth, not fifth, not sixth, but his 7th Super Bowl, now with a completely different team, albeit a loaded team, but still 7th Super Bowl.
Yep. Well, Tom Brady, we did have an article at Watson Sports entitled "It's Not Wise to Bet Against Tom Brady," and we've just seen it in Super Bowl 55 why it's not wise to bet against Tom Brady. So there has been a lot of first for Tom Brady in this game. So apparently after 10 Super Bowls, this is the first game that he had a touchdown in the first quarter and had a lead after the first quarter. So all of his 9 Super Bowls, he did either a 0-0 tie or the other team was leading. So this is the first time with that pass to Gronkowski, an 8-yard pass to Gronkowski, that he had a lead after one quarter. And it just snowballed after that, mainly because they were able to establish the run game with Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette. So once Fournette and Jones was able to penetrate through that Kansas City D-line, and of course, like we've mentioned before, the weak point of the Kansas City defense, which is the line area. So they were constantly getting like 5, 6, 7 yards. So once they have established that, they were able to activate the play action. And check this out, this stat from Next Gen Stats. So all 3 touchdown passes of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are from play action. So that statement alone says a lot, that the running game was effective to an extent that they were able to keep the drive going, A. B, they were able to create play action. That's why they got 3 touchdown passes. And the knockout punch of them all, Leonard Fournette was able to get a touchdown with that fantastic pull block by Marpet to give their 4th touchdown of the game. And Suckup just added 1 field goal to make it 31. So it was really a methodical, precise, precision game offensively for Tom Brady. We wouldn't expect anything else for someone who has been there 10 times. He doesn't have any like butterflies in the stomach anymore.
Oh, no.
So
listen, I let me tell you how this game really played out. And people who don't look at this from a 3D perspective didn't realize what was happening. Kansas City came in with a defense that wasn't very good at stopping the run. Listening to the interview with Fournette after the game, Fournette said that Brady kept telling him, listen, these guys lead the league in being the worst team for yards after catch and being the worst team for yards after contact. So what he was letting them know is that this is not a great tackling team. It's not a technically sound team. And also, if you watched Kansas City throughout the playoffs, they ran about 45% dime coverage. Now, dime coverage is 4 down linemen, 1 linebacker, and the rest are all defensive backs. And what Kansas City was doing in order to create all these pressures was they were bringing guys off the edge, and you never knew who was coming. So Tampa Bay had the perfect offense set up in the first quarter for that. They open up the game. They go deep on like the second throw of the game. You're like, wow, they're really going to stretch the field. Kansas City's got the mindset. They're going to stretch the field. They're going to do what they've been doing all year long. And what does Tampa do? Tampa doesn't do that. Tampa stays dedicated to a ground game where they averaged, I believe, 6 yards a run. They stay dedicated to a ground game. Fournette played with a passion, with like serious beast mode. That guy was wanted to be unstoppable, and he was. Ronald Jones came in right after him, played really well as well. But when they weren't doing that, if you noticed, a lot of short passes. Wasn't a typical Bruce Arians, no risk it, no biscuit type of offense that you saw here. A lot of short passes, a lot of screens, a lot of creative screens, a lot of little quick dumps. Let's hit Gronk real quick. Let's hit the Antonio Brown real quick. Let's hit the little sweet stuff. That opened up everything because the defensive coordinator for Kansas City didn't know what to do. He had to stop all the pressure. He was like, okay, I got to stop the pressure. Now when he stops the pressure, Brady's like, oh, you're going to be in zone because you think we're running the ball. So you've got to respect the play action. You're in zone. Now I'm hitting play action. Boom. Now I can go over top of the one or two linebackers that you're actually playing with. They completely took Kansas City out of what was supposed to be their game. A brilliantly called game by Byron Leftwich. If Byron Leftwich is really in charge of that offense like Bruce Arians says he is, if he runs it completely like Arians says, then he should be up for a head coaching job next year. That was absolutely masterful and fantastic. That entire coaching staff deserves a huge round of applause for what they did. Tom Brady won the MVP. In my opinion, the coaching staff is the MVP of that game. The defensive line was second, and Brady, who I have a ton of respect for, would be third on my list of guys.
Yeah, if only we can give the Super Bowl MVP to an entire unit, I would give it to the defense because they set the tone. And speaking of adjustments also, so remember during the regular season meeting, it was basically a single high safety and Carlton Davis was the guy covering Tyreek Hill. In this game, they essentially had like two guys on Hill for almost the entire game. So he had less than 100 yards. So Kansas City has nothing to do but to throw the passes to Kelsey because that's what Tampa Bay is giving them. But they cannot defeat Tampa Bay with Travis Kelsey alone. Tyreek Hill was covered for most of the game. And that's one of the reasons of their downfall. They only had 9 points without a touchdown in Super Bowl 55.
Kansas City never made the adjustments. We talked about that. And Kansas City got away from the run game way, way, way too quickly. They were averaging 7 yards a carry at one point. Why not stick with the run? They got behind a little bit and they were like, oh, we got the greatest quarterback in the world. We're just going to throw the ball as much as we can. As soon as you realize that pass rush is killing you like that, what do? You should be running screens and you should be running draw plays. Draw plays to your running back over and over again. Make those guys feel like, hey, if we step upfield too fast, he's going to beat us. Quarterback draws. The first quarter, Mahomes is running all over him. He's got pressure, but he's running all over them. They're calling design plays that get Mahomes out of the pocket and let him scramble. And I understand that you don't want Mahomes to run too much. You don't want to take too many hits. But it was working, and they got away from what was working. It was such a bizarre coaching choice, in my opinion. I thought it was just such a huge mistake. So, look, I I would like to say Kansas City is going to learn from this and move forward and become a better team. I don't know if that's actually going to be true. We're going to talk about which teams are actually favored to win next year's Super Bowl. Believe it or not, Tampa Bay is not the most favored team to win next year's Super Bowl. We're going to talk about that in a second. But before we talk about that, we've talked a little bit about gambling and how it relates to the Super Bowl this weekend. There were some huge bets this weekend. Some really interesting, very huge bets that we're going to talk about. People put out a lot of money out there. Early reports said that there would be over $1 billion wagered,
Wow.
in the United States over the course of this weekend. Now, most of the public money ended up on Tampa Bay. At the beginning of the week, it was Kansas City. And towards the end, the odds went towards Tampa Bay. So I don't know if we found the number yet of how bad the sports books got beat, but they were saying that the numbers were going to be very, 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 very big, that a lot of the sports books took a huge bath on the heads up play. Now, I think where the sports books make up some of the money that a lot of people don't talk about is these prop bets are just so prominent in the NFL for Super Bowl. People will bet on anything for the Super Bowl. Like I actually I did one prop bet just for fun, and it was $100, and I won $100 on heads. So I took heads. I took heads instead of tails. I went back and looked at the last 5 years to see what the trend was, and I went against what the trend was, and it really worked out for me. So I made an extra $100 doing that, which was interesting. Can you tell me about some other interesting bets that happened out there this week?
Okay, so speak of prop bets, so before we continue, so a lot of people were ticked off when they cut away from Bruce Arians being showered by the Gatorade because the bettors would have wanted to see the color, but I guess it turned to be orange. I'm not mistaken. Okay, so for the more prominent bets in the Super Bowl, so there's this hip hop artist by the name of French Montana who actually made a video that he laid $250,000 for Tampa Bay to win the Super Bowl. So I'm not sure what kind of bet it is, but I'm sure that he had a massive payoff because, well, the Buccaneers won big.
Yeah, so if he took the spread, 250 would probably net him like 220. If he took the straight up, if he took the straight up bet, 250 would have won him about 300K.
Yeah.
So it's a heck of a bet, man. It's brave as hell. But if you got that kind of money to throw around, why not?
Yeah, definitely, totally. Yeah.
Who else?
So here's another interesting bet. So the wager is not as big as French Montana's, but it's just $500. But it's a parlay actually. So the parlay is Leonard Fournette, anytime touchdown scorer, check.
Okay.
Rob Gronkowski, anytime touchdown scorer, check. Rob Gronkowski again over 29.5 receiving yards, another check. And the fourth check, Antonio Brown, anytime touchdown scorer as well. So from that $500, this guy won 25,808.26.
So do you know who that bet was?
Apparently we haven't learned who it is, but we've seen a screenshot sent to us.
I actually know who it is. I sent you the screenshot. I just didn't tell you who it was. Can you guess who it is? It's somebody else who has a podcast radio show.
Oh, so we've referenced about him multiple times in this game, in this show. So probably Pat McAfee.
It was actually Pat McAfee. I follow Pat McAfee on Twitter. He had showed the bet about an hour before the game, and then he won the bet. Yeah.
Yeah, at least he got this bet right because he laid like 30,000 on tails, if I'm not mistaken, and got it wrong.
He lost tails, but I believe he also put 30,000 on Tampa. So look, if he won 30,000 on Tampa, 125 on this, lost that. So he made money. I mean, unless he just did stupid stuff, he made himself some money over this weekend. And a lot of bettors did. Now that's the downside of the Super Bowl. And that's what I always tell people. Those prop bets are nonsense. I mean, I put $100 on heads or tails just to say I got to bet heads or tails, but I had big money riding on Tampa, and I had big money riding on the under. And that's what I would recommend to people. But these prop bets, it's nonsense. It's just, if you want to bet on something, bet on something. Look, the guy bet $500 and won $25,000. Pure and total luck. Good for him. I'm happy when that happens to people. You can make 50 times your money just like that. Hey, good for you, buddy. Any more? You got any more huge bets out there?
Okay, so here's one more. So as we all know, Rob Gronkowski scored the first touchdown in Super Bowl 55. So apparently, there's this one guy who laid $1,500 for that to happen, and he won $34,500 because of that bet.
It's a beautiful bet, man.
Yeah,
that is a beautiful bet. When you could put $1,500 down somewhere, and 2 hours later come up with 35 grand. That is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful bet, man. Good for that guy. God bless him. God bless him.
It's definitely off to a vacation wherein it's COVID free or less restrictions. Yeah.
Heck yeah. Look, for a lot of guys, if that guy's a white collar professional guy, that might be half a salary for the year. Like he might have made half of his salary on a bet. I would guess if he's betting $1,500, he's probably making a lot more money than that. But you'd be surprised. People gamble. People love gambling. Now, speaking of which, if you guys love gambling, every year there's prop bets. Now, what Lance was talking about was an actual prop bet. A prop bet is betting that something happens, whether it's how long the national anthem is, heads or tails, or what's also a cool prop bet is to go in advance and decide if you can figure out who's going to be in next year's Super Bowl. Now, I know it's really early to talk about that, but I mean, the game was over for maybe an hour, and people were, and this was already released from Vegas of who was going to win the Super Bowl next year. Now, the biggest shocker to me was that Tampa Bay was dominant in that game, and Tampa Bay is not the number one team. They don't have the best odds to repeat the Super Bowl next year. Tell us who does.
Apparently, it's the losers, the Kansas City Chiefs, who has the best odds. Despite losing a 22-point Super Bowl, they still have the top odds of winning Super Bowl 56, even though they've been exposed and a lot of teams will copy what Tampa Bay did. So they still have an 11-2 odds. Well, probably because there's reasoning behind it. Eric Fisher is out, so if he'll able to play an entire season next season, so that's big boost for the Chiefs. And also, let's not forget that Patrick Mahomes has a turf toe coming into this game. So, regardless of what the Chiefs say, it does affect his game. So, Chiefs 11 over 2.
Yeah, listen, that's the odds, 11-2. So if you bet $110, you can win $200 back. So I have this thing where I say sometimes we get the crush on somebody. Sometimes you get a crush on a girl, a woman. She's not a good woman. She's not a good woman, but you just have this crush because she's just so attractive. When I was younger, I would fall for this all the time. I was always like, oh my God, she's so pretty. And then I'm just like, she's such a bad person. She's just not a good person. But I would continue to deal with her not being a good person because she was so pretty. The Kansas City Chiefs are that pretty girl, that pretty yet flawed girl that the sports world is in love with. And they just can't get it out of their heads that they're the best team in the world. I would short the Kansas City Chiefs. I would find the bet, whatever the odds are that they're not going to win the Super Bowl, and I would bet that. Because number one, unless you're Tom Brady, it's really hard to go back and win a Super Bowl. It just is. It's very difficult. I don't care what people say. It's very difficult to go back and win a Super Bowl. I would also say it's extremely hard. It's extremely hard to go back 2 years in a row after you just lost, come back the next year and be dominant and win again. You're right about the fact that this is a copycat league, and people are seeing what's wrong. People are noticing what is wrong with the Kansas City Chiefs, and they're going to actually exploit it in the future. So I see this being huge problems. I'll tell you what, why don't you give me the top 3 teams for the odds to make the Super Bowl, and then give me the bottom 3, and let's compare them.
Okay, so Chiefs number 1. Apparently number 2 is also a surprising team, the Packers. So one team that has been dominated by the Buccaneers as well.
Wow. Okay.
So Packers are 9-1, and then Tampa Bay comes in at number 3, 11-1. So utter shame and utter disrespect for what the Buccaneers just did. They just dominated the defending champions.
Well, look, again, like I said, it is very difficult to repeat. So it's very difficult to come out and say that you're going to you think that the defending champ is going to win next year. But don't bet against Tom Brady. The guy's played 20 years. He's been in the Super Bowl 10 times. That's literally unheard of. No one's ever done that. And listen, I don't think anybody ever will again. If we're being totally honest, I'm not sure I'll live that long to give somebody an opportunity, but it's an impossible feat. It's almost impossible. So let's see what happens. But so you got Kansas City first, you got Green Bay second, you got Tampa Bay third. What are the bottom 3 teams?
Okay, so before we continue with the bottom 3, let's not forget the last quarterback to win back-to-back, Tom Brady in the Super Bowl.
Exactly.
Okay,
Don't bet against Tom Brady.
Yeah, never bet against Tom Brady. It's like the first commandment in the NFL. Okay, so actually this we have like bottom 4 because 3 teams are tied with the same odds, and then there's one team that has worse odds than them. So at 40-1, the 3 teams are the Arizona Cardinals, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Las Vegas Raiders. And at 50-1, the New England Patriots.
50-1 to win the Super Bowl next year. Well, like they weren't that good this year, so I think that's a pretty strong bet. We don't even know who their quarterback's going to be. If it's Cam Newton again, I'd put 100-1 against that. So those are interesting.
So that's
odds.
50-1 for the Patriots.
Those are interesting odds.
Yeah, indeed. I don't see anyone really hitting this odds, but just a question for you, John. Who do you think from these teams can make the biggest jump for next season?
The biggest jump next year? Look, I would like to see the Titans actually tighten up their defense. I would like to see Buffalo tighten up their defense a little bit and work on their running game. And to me, those are 2 teams out of the AFC that could make exponential jumps and definitely come back and really make a play against the Kansas City Chiefs. I also don't want to discount the fact that you got Baltimore and Cleveland in a very tough division, but both of those teams are really stacked. Baltimore needs to work on getting a little bit more of a passing game, quite honestly, but they can fix that, fix a couple small issues they have on defense. they're a competitor again too. And Cleveland's just loaded. I mean, you got 2 Pro Bowl caliber running backs. You got 2 Pro Bowl caliber wide receivers. You got 2 great tight ends. You got a really good offensive line. You got a decent defense. You got a quarterback who's still under a rookie contract for 2 more years. You got, to me, in Cleveland, you got a 2-year run to actually try to win a Super Bowl there, get yourself to a Super Bowl. And now you have the experience. You have Stefanski, who's just won Coach of the Year. Look, that's going to be a tough team coming up. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. We have a very tough division we're going to be playing in with Baltimore and Cleveland. Those are the teams I see in the AFC. In the NFC, obviously, you got to go back and look at the Rams. The Rams appear to have the defense. They think they have the quarterback now. This the kind of trade that could actually put the pep in that entire team step and get them very excited about the fact they have a guy who's really a gunslinger in Matthew Stafford. He's not quite the safe thrower that Goff was. And, one of the teams that I really like in that division, I think San Francisco is actually getting an opportunity to be healthy and come back and be a better team. But one team that I really like to take a huge step will be the Arizona Cardinals. I think the Arizona Cardinals have a very unique offense. They've got a Kyler Murray, who is just a dynamic player. They've got an okay defense that can be patched up and made a little bit better. If they can get a little more balance on the offensive side and, maybe one more offensive lineman, a couple holes filled on defense. And I think the Arizona Cardinals are another team. And all 3 of those teams come out of the same division too, which is very, very weird. But that's a very strong division. I think that division has a very good opportunity to make some noise next year. All right. So listen, guys, our website is called whatsonsports.com. And while we're over there, you guys can go over and check it out right now, read some cool articles, watch some cool videos, listen to some podcasts. And you can also send us messages. And not messages like, hey, guys, go screw yourself, but messages like, hey, guys, can you answer my question? So every week we dig inside the mailbag. We take out the questions from the mailbag. I don't do it. Lance goes through. He finds 3 of the greatest questions. He reads the questions to me. I answer the questions to the best of my ability. Lance will answer back and talk about a little bit something over there. So we go back and forth and try to answer these people's questions. Let's go to question number 1 out of the mailbag today. Here we go.
Okay, so question number 1 comes from Anita from Atlanta. So if you're watching, Anita, hello. Even with Eric Fisher around, will the Kansas City O-line prevent the swarming Tampa Bay defense?
Yes. I do not believe that Kansas City is going to make this mistake twice. Kansas City will build in packages that will have to protect Patrick Mahomes. He is the franchise. And forget about the fact he's got a 10-year extension on his contract. Yeah. But he is the entire offense. You have to protect Patrick Mahomes. You have to give him time, and you have to figure out a way that teams can't line up in a 4-man front and be able to put that kind of pressure on you. So I think Eric Fisher comes back and he's healthy. I think that they invest either a high draft choice or 2 in more offensive linemen so they can create that depth that needs to happen there. They may even go into free agency. You might be able to get an older guy who just wants to win a Super Bowl, and that might be, he may think that's his path to go play for Kansas City at a discounted rate. I should be getting $9 million. I'll play for $5 million, a guy like that. I don't have any guys off the top of my head, so I don't want to say any names, but yes, I believe this is definitely a fixable thing. I also think it's scheme, like we talked about. You have to figure out a way where you can put an extra tight end in that can block. You got to, maybe it's not going to be Kelsey because he's such a weapon, but get another tight end who can block, who can chip somebody. Bring in Le'Veon Bell, who may not be the running back he was before, but Le'Veon Bell, in my eyes, is one of the best pass defending running backs that I've seen ever in the NFL. He barely saw the field yesterday. He barely touched the field. He didn't get a carry. I rarely saw him out there. I would have played Le'Veon Bell a lot more in the backfield as a sidecar for Patrick Mahomes and told him, listen, chip the hell out of somebody. You got to protect this guy. So, yes, I think Kansas City will fix the problem. I just think that they were too stubborn in the moment or maybe unprepared in the moment to fix it. And so they just didn't do it.
Yeah. So coming into the draft, I guess it made it easier for them to really assess what's the weak link in their offense or in their team in total. So Patrick Mahomes always gives them an opportunity to win. So they have to protect that asset. So wouldn't be surprising if they get a free agent offensive lineman in the offseason or do it through the draft.
Yeah, they're going to have a little bit of cap space somehow. That Kansas City's really worked out a way to be able to have a little bit of cap space coming into this offseason. Sammy Watkins comes off the books. A couple other medium-sized contracts come off the books. You can always rework some of Mahomes' cap space and move it forward so that you can say, this is our window. We have to try to win now. So I see Kansas City making some moves in the offseason that actually make that team just a little bit better. Let's go to our next question.
Okay, so this is from George of Chicago. Hello, George. So, will being traded to a new team help Carson Wentz resurrect his once promising career?
So I watched Carson Wentz play last year or this past year, and there were games where he just looked awful, and there were games like against Pittsburgh where he looked really well. He looked really good. The guy can still play, in my opinion. Something happened inside his head. Something got scrambled inside his head, whether it was the way he was being coached or the way he was accepting coaching. You hear a lot of different stories. The story I heard was that he wasn't accepting coaching the way that he should have. Maybe there was a personal issue between him and the coaches. I don't know the whole story, but there's got to be a reason that a guy who was in the MVP talks just 2 years ago declines at such a rapid rate at the age he is. I don't know what the answer is, but it's funny that the guy wrote from Chicago, because the last thing that I read was that the Chicago Bears were actually jumping into the front of the conversation to try to get Carson Wentz to be in Chicago. And that package, strangely enough, could involve Nick Foles being traded back to Philadelphia. Now, I think that would make Nick Foles the most traded quarterback of all time. It's incredible how much this guy just gets pushed around. But he keeps going back to Philly and playing really well, although it'll be a different offense there, so I don't know. I would just say this, and I'll leave it at this. I think Carson Wentz has an opportunity. He's young. He's obviously gifted and talented. He's an incredible athlete. He doesn't get enough credit for being the great athlete that he is. He can run with his legs. He can move around the pocket a little bit. Fantastic arm. If they can fix the mentals, whatever's going on up here that isn't working right, if he can fix that, I think he's got a real opportunity to come back, maybe not to the superstar potential level that he was before, but to be a top 10 quarterback again and create a winning atmosphere around somebody. Sometimes you need a fresh start.
Yeah, I agree with the fresh start, because it changes your perspective with fresh starts. And I guess if he ever gets to Chicago, so he will push Mitch Trubisky for the starting quarterback role. So it will either expose Trubisky or improve him as well. So that's a win-win for the Bears. So you have two able quarterbacks that has what it takes to lead them to the playoffs, especially Carson Wentz.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Bears might move away from Trubisky altogether this year and just try somebody new. You know, they tried Trubisky, it didn't work. They tried Foles, it didn't work. That's a fan base that's becoming very impatient with what's going on. So if it ends up being the Bears, I think the Bears need to do something do something that's considered huge. Now the problem is that contract. You know, Philadelphia is asking for 2 first-round draft choices to take Carson Wentz. And I don't think they understand what happened in LA. LA gave 2 first-round draft choices so somebody would take off. They didn't get 2 first-round draft choices. So to think that you have this quarterback that you yourself have destroyed the value of, that's the bad part about sitting a guy like Wentz. You destroyed the value of the asset. No one thinks he's a starting quarterback right now. Everyone thinks he's a failure. So he's got the value of a failure. So a failing quarterback could get you a 2nd-round draft choice if you're lucky. Maybe a 3rd-rounder. With that contract, maybe a 5th-rounder. Maybe you have to give picks to get rid of that contract. So you're gonna have to find somebody out there, a buyer who really, 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 really is in love with Carson Wentz, wanted to draft him, now sees this as an opportunity. And I think with everything that we've heard, and I've only heard some things. I think with everything that they're hearing, which is a lot more than us, I think there's going to be some issues with that. I truly believe that. Let's go to our last question. And our last question comes from...
Okay, so our last question comes from Sage from Minnesota.
Sage.
Hello, Sage. So even if they've just won the Super Bowl, where else can the Tampa Bay Buccaneers improve?
Well, look, on paper, the Tampa Bay does not have a fantastic secondary. They don't really have a shutdown corner. So that's one place where they can improve. You know, going into free agency like like the New England Patriots did years ago, and finding a Darrelle Revis that just wants to win a championship, signing him to a 2-year deal for, what is considered to be a team-friendly deal, and putting him out on an island and letting him be that shutdown guy. That could be a path that they go down. Other than that, you're going to have to look at the age that you're dealing with. Shaq Barrett, I believe, is a free agent.
Yes.
Ndamukong Suh is getting older now. Pierre-Paul will be getting older. If you're going to continue to run this type of defense, you need those type of players. So you may need to reload the defensive line a little bit too. And even if it's not to replace a starter, if it's nothing else, it's got to be there to be able to ready in case you have depth issues later on. And on the offensive side of the ball, look, that's a great offense, man. That is a loaded offense. I believe Fournette is a free agent after this year. He's got to be replaced unless you just want to go with the single back Rojo type of deal. And honestly, if you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, there's one other place that you've really got to concentrate on, and that's quarterback. I mean, you've got to think at some point that Tom Brady could get hurt, could have a problem, could get older, could start to hit the wall. Eventually, it's going to happen. You got to start getting ready for the fact that Brady may be leaving a few years from now. So if I'm Tampa and I'm able to shore up everybody I have, and I think I'm a loaded team, and I roll into the second round of this draft, and a guy like Mac Jones from Alabama sitting there, I might pull the trigger and say, you know what? There's no one better that this guy can learn from than Tom Brady. Tom Brady's only going to play a couple more years. Mac Jones would have the opportunity to sit behind this guy, the greatest quarterback of all time, sit behind him and learn exactly how he does everything. And if he's any kind of student at all, he could end up being something. It could be an Aaron Rodgers situation where he gets to sit behind Brett Favre for a few years and learn the game and learn how to prepare and learn how to go out and actually, be a professional. So those are the things I'd like to see Tampa do. If I'm a Tampa fan, if I'm a Tampa general manager, those are the things I'm concentrating on. How about you?
Yeah, I guess with the Mac Jones, if ever he slides to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that's a good scenario because essentially it would be like Alabama all over again. So he'll have loaded weapons.
Yeah.
So the adjustment period for him wouldn't be as hard as compared to, let's say, a Justin Fields or a Trevor Lawrence getting selected first or second overall.
Yeah.
So they're starting with a depleted, if not empty roster. Even though they have so much talent, they couldn't do everything because they have to rely on their receivers. So it could be a win-win scenario if ever that happens. But given how tight the championship window for Tampa Bay, I don't see it lasting for beyond 3 years. They have to win now, and the most immediate need that they have is the secondary on the defense. So they do have young guns there. They do have maturing players in the secondary, but I guess they still need more talent in that side. And of course, you couldn't have too many pass rushers, especially it's hard to bank on a defense playing at the elite level for 2 straight years. So you should always replenish your talent base with younger and hungrier edge rushers that can eventually take the place of a Pierre-Paul or a Barrett eventually.
Yeah, look, I agree with the whole, it's a small window thing. I think Tampa's got to be careful not to fall into the small window thing. You got a 68-year-old coach. You got a 42-year-old quarterback. It's fine to concentrate on the window. When you're done, you don't want to fall into obscurity like they did last time. They won a Super Bowl last time and then just fell right off the side because they just never replenished the way they should have. So it's not. And again, I don't want to go back and beat a dead horse. I understand you have the window, but if you have an opportunity at a quarterback, someone that can sit behind Brady and watch, and maybe even a guy you pick with that last pick of the draft, the 32 at the 32nd pick, because you get him for that 5th round, or sorry, that 5-year contract, 4 years with a team option. I think maybe that's a solution that could work for them. So that's why I see Tampa. You and I kind of see it the same way. Hopefully they can put it together and maybe win a Super Bowl again next year. You never know. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is John Todora. They call me the Sports Trader. With me today for this entire show has been Lance Fernandez. They call him the Sports Nerd. Together, we do the What's on Sports podcast. We're here Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays live on Facebook and YouTube. We sure hope like hell that you'll listen to us again. Or for those of you that are listening today that missed the rest of the show and want to catch all the great stuff we talked about, you can download us at your favorite podcast platforms. We're out of here.